My Zoom is basic. And the university thinks that they've bought it for me, but Zoom doesn't think that they've bought it for me. So that's where we are. So we may get kicked off and then we can come back on. And if we're done before that, that's fine. It's up to you. I guess I'm imagining this being about an hour, and we can go through the different components of that review packet and just talk through some stuff. And if you have questions after that, I can stick around a little while, and then we can also, continue to talk this week before the exam opens on Wednesday. So just to talk about the exam for a minute, I'll probably end up sharing my screen, but just for right now, let me start by just looking at the review packet with you. I can close Word.
Dr. Shoup,
yes.
Where can we find the review packet, please?
So it's on Canvas there's a midterm folder, and then also I think I just attached it to an announcement a little while ago. Yes, and I sent a reminder about this session at 2:30, and the packet is attached to that announcement also. So, okay, let's start there though, with that packet. So the exam itself will look similar to the packet that I've given you. In fact, let me just go ahead and start sharing my screen. And so here's the packet that you have. The exam will look very similar to this in that it will start with a long figured base, very similar to this one, where I have crammed in a bunch of stuff. So I've got the augmented 6 chords in there, and I've got a Neapolitan chord in there, and I've got some secondary stuff in there. So just, kind of a variety of things in that figured base. It's similar to stuff that you've done on the last 2 assignments as well. Last one assignment, I guess. In general, I would recommend for preparing for the exam to go back through your assignments and look at stuff that didn't go so well. Like look at common part writing mistakes that you were making. Look at places where maybe you missed a cadence or missed the fact that a phrase, was ending and a new one was starting or something like that with all the classical form stuff. So in any case, your past assignments can definitely help you. And then I'd say the handouts for all the videos can also help to prepare. So then after I've done some figured base, then I've asked you to do some analysis, and I've got multiple analysis examples that I want you to do in the exam. Similar in length to these. In one of them, I'm going to ask you about periods and sentences. So I've kind of rolled that into one of the questions. And then in one of them, I ask you about binary versus ternary. So a few different kind of analysis examples to cover a bunch of that stuff. Then, so the binary ternary question will look a lot like this on the packet, where it's like, which one is it? And if it's binary, then what kind is it? And so on. I just noted this here, but we can write some stuff here if you want to kind of brainstorm some bullet points or whatever. I'll have a couple of short questions about the readings. Those don't need to be polished writing. They can just be bullet points. It can be, incomplete sentences. That's totally fine. This is the nature of this exam, is that it is open to notes and going back and looking at those readings and looking at the discussion thread, because I don't know how I would stop you from doing that. So it's fine with me. Like, I'm not expecting you to have totally memorized everything about each of these, but it would be great if you could refresh yourself about it, so that like when it comes time to do the exam, you're not like struggling to flip through a whole bunch of different pages. So that's what I've put here. And then I think the only other thing I didn't put on this review page is just the for classical form. I might ask you to draw a form chart for one of the classical forms. Like I don't think I can reasonably expect you to analyze an entire sonata form. and do all this other stuff. So that's why I'm not going to necessarily give you like 7 pages of scores and then ask you to like do this huge analysis of the sonata or sonata rondo, but I might ask you to just like sketch it out. And you know, that could look like a lot of different things. You could kind of, as long as it's legible, it'll be okay. So let's see, for example, well, let's start here. Let's say I asked you to make a sonata form. You might have something that's like this. Sonata form start with an exposition, and then there's a development, and then there is a recap. And so then you could go in and fill in, like in a imaginary sonata, what would be in the exposition and what order would those things come in. You know, you would have a main theme and a transition and a subordinate theme or secondary theme, depending on what your preference is for that word, and closing material somewhere in that sonata. And, you know, typically then there's some kind of double bar even in a lot of cases, but sometimes there's, you know, some kind of like final cadence to make it really clear that that section has ended. In the development section, do you remember? It's fine with me if you unmute yourself and ask a question or chime in whenever you want, but do you remember what typically happens in a development section? It's okay if you're not sure. It's been like 3 weeks. In the development section, you might see a core. You might see a pre-core. I mean, you're almost definitely going to see the core. It's just a matter of whether or not anything comes before it. And of course, by core, what I mean is sequences. And then again, if I'm asking you to sort of draw this, this is the kind of thing that I mean, like drawing, you know, or just sort of labeling which of these things happens in which section of the sonata, what are the big sections of the sonata form, things like that. If you can do that for each of the big forms that we talked about, I think you'll be in really good shape. So maybe just draft one of each of them, you know, and have it on hand. You might also note that we start in the tonic and we either modulate to 5 or the relative major, depending on what, if we start in a major or minor key. So, you know, that would be a thing that you'd want to be able to articulate either in a form chart or in just like a short answer type fill in the blank kind of question. Like, you know, so in an exposition, typically if you start in a major key, you would end up in 5. Or typically if you start in a minor key, you would end up in the relative major by the end of it. And so then in the recap, you know, what would be different? That's a question that I could ask you, like what's different between the exposition and the recap of a sonata in terms of keys or in terms of other changes, you know? Does anybody want to unmute real quick and tell me what you think the difference might be?
I mean, I think in particular, having a coda in the recapitulation is really important.
So you could have a coda. What else is different? Because the coda is technically optional.
So the main theme often returns.
Yep, main theme return.
It can key change quite a lot of the time, am I correct?
The main theme should be in the tonic when it comes back. And then we would probably also have the transition. Kind of shorten.
The secondary themes are also in the tonic key in the recap, right?
Exactly. That's the big, big difference is that, and I'll just sort of circle it to, oops, no, not that. This one. the secondary theme is also in tonic in the recap. That's our biggest distinguishing difference between them. And then you'll have some kind of closing theme that might also lead to a coda. So if I ask you to do a form chart, or I might give you a partially filled in one and then you can finish it, but it looks something like this.
Isn't there also a standing on the dominant in the development?
Thank you for bringing that up. So standing on the dominant, I usually abbreviate like that. Usually comes right about at the end of the development, and it helps us get back into the proper tonic key, because the development might have modulated all over the place with that many sequences. It could be in some completely different key, but we want the recap to come back in the tonic. And then that tonic lasts the whole time in the recap. In a typical one, of course, there are exceptions to that. I think we even saw some, but you know, that's the kind of standard thing that you should expect to happen. So those are the main sections of the exam: the part writing, score analysis, a couple of short questions about the readings, a couple of this kind of question about classical form. So it's not short. And in light of that, I decided to make it available Wednesday morning instead of Wednesday night, in case you want to just get started a little bit earlier on it, because everybody's schedule is different. And so you should be able to access it by 7 a.m. if you really, really want to get a start on it. That's very early.
Dr. Sheep.
Yes.
What are the other classical forms that might be on the exam?
Sure, good question. Let's make a little list. So classical forms that we have done and that could be on the exam. That would include things like, well, really to go all the way back, binary and, or sorry, all the way back would be sentences and periods. And then also binary and ternary. And then I believe, I can't remember if we did sonata or rondo next, but rondo and sonata and sonata rondo would be the last one. So those are classical forms that we covered that are fair game.
I'm not at all familiar with sonata rondo. What is that?
Sonata rondo, which I'm sure that there's a discussion thread from, I'm not sure which week, but if you go back and look at the discussion threads, there's one about sonata rondo for sure. I might have done these two together, but a sonata rondo is like if you combined all the parts from a rondo and all the parts from a sonata, like the name sort of suggests. So you would have the, you know, a rondo would typically be A, B, A, C, A, or actually it'll stay in the same window. Or A, B, A, C, A, D, A could either be 5 or 7 parts. And so you take those parts of the rondo and kind of map them onto the sonata. So A matches up with the main theme. The transition stays the way it is because rondos can have transitions or retransitions. So A matches up with the main theme, transition. B matches up with the secondary theme. And then you have another A section where normally you would just move on. So A shows up again around here. And so then C corresponds to the development. And then the return, like the recap, is similar to the way it would work in a sonata. You hear the main theme again, that's A, transition. You hear B, again, connecting with the subordinate theme. And then you hear A one more time. So we're just sort of like taking those two forms and cramming them together into one giant form. It looks like we did rondo and sonata rondo together in week 5. So if you want to go back to look at that all that stuff would be in the discussion from week 5.
So just to clarify, is it basically going to be like similar to the assignment? It's just a little bit more heavily weighted, so we can print it off.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, you certainly don't have to print it off. I know some of you are doing it, you know, with editing it digitally if you have like the iPad with the pen, or if you, you know, have another way of editing the PDF digitally, that's fine. But you're also welcome to print it off, and then you can take pictures of each page, or you can scan it and send it back to me. And if you're worried about Canvas not working correctly, then just send it to me over an email or a series of emails if you need to, just because I think that it's always better safe than sorry. You know, if you're at all worried about it, it should be fine. Canvas has been cooperating pretty well. So
which do you prefer specifically? Because I tend to have interesting handwriting.
Oh, as long as it's legible, it's fine. I mean, sometimes stuff looks weirder digitally than if you just wrote it yourself. So
Thank you.
sure. Yeah, as long as I can read it, it is acceptable. So what would you rather practice first anyways? Or at least we'll do some of each, but would you rather start with doing some of this figured bass together, or would you rather do analysis?
Please, can we do a figured bass? Because I don't know about anyone else, but oh my god, like
Figure bass.
Absolutely. I'm gonna do it as I've done on the video on MuseScore, which may make some weird noises, so just go with it. But this is the same figured bass that's on the handout, this F major. I'm just gonna reposition a little. Okay, so if I were you, the way that I like to go through a figured bass is to start with the Roman numerals, because that helps me know at least what chords I'm supposed to be writing. And Michael, Mikkel, is there a bird on your shoulder?
There is a bird on my shoulder.
That's awesome. What's its name?
Cosmo.
Oh.
He wouldn't shut up, so I just picked him up.
Okay. That's very cool. Okay. Sorry to interrupt for that, but all of a sudden I was like, hey, there's a bird. Okay. Okay, so like I said, I start with the Roman numerals generally. I think that just helps me know what I'm supposed to be doing. And when you're looking at a figured bass, I think another good thing to do up front is to go through anything without a figure underneath it, because you know that that's in root position. So for example, starting here, nothing underneath scale degree 1, that means that this is 1, for example. So you can go through and see others where that's the case. Most of them will have figures, because at this point, you know so many different chords that I have to like try to include them, and then, you know, they usually require something. But for example, this one has nothing underneath it. That means that's scale degree 6. That makes that one 6. Let me just move them down a little bit. I really don't want you to write I don't like this, like cramming the Roman numeral up next to the figured bass, because that's technically not the same thing. Like those numbers have a really different job. Okay. Anyway, keep looking what else doesn't have anything underneath it. Here's one without anything. That is scale degree 4, which means that that is 4. Now at this point, you might see this thing where we have 5, 5 in a row, and this series of numbers underneath it. And you might know at this point, like, oh, that's probably a cadential 6/4 chord, or that thing that looks like 6/4 going to 5/3 that I had to beat out of you at the beginning of the semester, that this is not a 1/6/4. There is no 1/6/4. But you might recognize this and think like, oh, that's probably a cadential 6/4 chord. It's at the end. It has all those figures the way one of those chords would. 8, 7. Oh, except it doesn't like it when I do this with the Roman numeral tool. So let me just do it the other way. 5. And then this is where I'm breaking my own rule and just putting the 5 next to the numbers. I'm not going to like take a whole bunch of points off if you do that, but I just think in general it's good not to do. Anyway, there's my 5. And I'm not gonna like end with a 3 chord or something weird. Like there's like a very regular pattern to this because that's how most tonal music actually works. So like, I'm not gonna try to trick you by ending with like a 2/7. I'm gonna end with a perfect authentic cadence, or at least an authentic cadence going from 5 to 1. In which case, here's my 1. Now this one does have a whole bunch of suspensions. That's just decorative. It doesn't affect the fact that it's a 1 chord at the end. So then I would probably go through and look for the like least complicated figures because some of them have a lot more going on than others. If there's a 7 underneath it, for example, that means all of these things are, it's like paint by numbers. It's telling you this is what is in the chord. A 7th above the bass is somewhere in this chord. It doesn't tell you if it has to be in soprano, alto, or tenor. It just tells you it's in there somewhere. And so that means that a 7th above C is in the chord, and there's nothing next to the 7 to mean that it gets altered in any way. So a 7th above C is B, as in Bravo. And B is flat in the key signature, so that means that somewhere up here I'm going to have a B flat. Notice also that 7 is an abbreviation for 5, 3, like that. We just usually don't put all that because it's just understood, which is a long story. But that's where that the other notes are coming from. So 5 above this C would be G. 3 above the C would be E. That means that I have a C dominant 7th chord in that spot, which means that this is just 5/7. So if you have, I know I'm going about that like really the long way, so if that was boring, I'm sorry, but I think it's good to review. That here, we've just got 5/7 in root position. Again, I'm looking for like the sort of least ridiculous looking figures. Here's one with just a 6 underneath it. Do you remember what that means?
It's the first inversion, right?
Yep, that means that's the chord in first inversion. Literally, it means that a 6th above A is in this chord. 6 is also an abbreviation for 6/3. We just, again, it's understood, and over time they just started calling it 6 instead. So that's a first inversion. And in this case, that means F is the root, and we're in F. So that means that this is a 1 chord also. Okay, now we're left with just, we're narrowing it down to the weirder and weirder things, but still, here's a 4/2 with no accidentals or anything on it. So in that case, I actually did this on the most recent assignment as well, so this might look familiar to you. Here's a 5/7 chord. 4 above B flat is E, 2 above B flat is C, is in cat. That means that this is actually another 5-7 chord just in an inversion. And I just really like this. I like, oops, wait a minute. Okay, I like stepping down from 5-7 to 5-4-2. So I'm making you do that again. It's a way of just evading a cadence. I think it sounds cool. And it goes to 1-6 really easily. So there's that progression. Okay, 3 things left. All of them have at least an accidental on them. Oh, 4 things. Okay, so FYI, 10-minute warning until we get kicked off and we'll just come right back on, okay? So, okay. Let's look at this chord before we get kicked off, which is Fa in the bass or scale degree 4. The flat 6 above it would be G flat. The flat 3 above it would be D flat. And that means that we've got a G flat major triad here. So what chord do you think that is? Somebody unmute and tell me what you think that is.
Will it be a Neapolitan?
Exactly. So in F major, the Neapolitan is going to be flat 2-6, and flat 2 in F major is going to be G flat. In which case, here is, oh, this annoying thing, but I do think it's worth doing, which is to insert a flat. Okay. Flat 2-6 like that. I don't want the Neapolitan to be spelled with an uppercase letter N. I know that that's a thing that people do, and you might have done it that way before. The reason is that I like that all the Roman numerals show function. And by function, I mean things like tonic, predominant, and dominant. And so 2 is a predominant, and calling the Neapolitan flat 2 shows that it's a predominant and it goes to 5. So it's like, shows you what it's supposed to do in the context of the progression. Okay, let's see if we can get through a couple more before we get kicked off. So here's, let's do this one. 4-2 with F in the bass and the 4 sharp. So that sharp doesn't mean literally add a sharp accidental. It actually means, you can't see my thumb, it actually means raise. So in this case, a 4th above F is B as in Bravo, and that is flat in the key signature. So the sharp actually means that should be B natural. So you might want to note that somewhere. And then 2 above F is G. One of the freshmen told me, or one of the undergrads told me that G in the Army letters is golf, which I think is weird, but okay. So 2 above F is G as in golf. So you'd have B natural, G, and F. And at that point, that chord might stick out to you a little bit. Does anybody know what that chord is? Unmute yourself if you do. I'll give you a hint, it is not major 2-7.
Is it 5 of 5?
Very good. So, and to be really specific, it's not just 5 of 5, it's 5, 4, 2 of 5. And then, actually not 5, right? No, yes, 5, you're right. Sorry. Correct, DJ, thank you. And then on the next beat, we have something weird. So I really just think going one number at a time is a good strategy, because then you'll have everything and you can kind of stand back and look at it and know what chord it is. You have 6 above E with a sharp on it. 6 above E would be C. I don't know the Army word for C. But anyway, C is in cat. With, whoa. DJ, are you highlighting the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was not trying to do that.
That's okay. I'm surprised it let you do that. That was very funny, because it looked like your name was just bouncing around the screen.
I was just trying to unmute myself. It's Charlie. Sorry.
Oh, it's Charlie. You're right. Thank you. Okay, C as in Charlie. C sharp as in Charlie in an upper voice, C sharp. 4 above E would be A. So we have A, C sharp, and E. And then 3 above E would be G as in golf. So now we've got A, C sharp, E, and G. E's in the bass. So instead of, this doesn't go to 5, in other words, like it's supposed to, and that's a thing that these progressions do sometimes. Instead, what is the chord, do you think?
It's a major 3, right?
It's not a major
But
3.
no.
If you find yourself wanting to write major 3, 7, or one of its inversions, it's probably 5 of something. So it's not that we'll never see a 3 chord, but I will not ask you to write a major minor 3, 7 chord with a bunch of inversions or anything like that.
So it's 5 of 7 or 5, 7 of 7.
Not of 7. Just think
6.
about it. 6, which is very close. That one resolves correctly. Yes, good.
It actually gives me a headache. I'm like sitting there like, what's the scale degree here? Like, it's good we've got more time.
You have to kind of go back a couple of steps. It's like a weird process. Okay, so what did we just say? 5, and it's 4, 3 is the inversion, right? Of 6. And it goes to 6, which is great. Okay, we have 4 minutes. I think we can do this last one, and then I think I'll just end the meeting and start a new meeting so that we don't get interrupted weirdly. Okay, same process. Sharp 6 above D would be, 6 above D would be B, and again, remember that it's not B flat going to B sharp, it's just raising whatever 6 above that is. In this case, that would be B natural, right? Flat 5 above would be A flat, and 3 above would be F. So we'd have D flat, F, A flat, and B natural. So unmute yourself if you know what chord that is.
It's a German 6.
Very good. It's a German 6 chord because we're going to have B natural is raised 4. We're going to have A flat, which is that flat 3, lowered 3, and we're going to have F, which is 1. That's always in those chords. So I know I'm just like spewing numbers at this point. So if that's confusing, you're not alone, and we can certainly go back over it as we fill it in. So at this point, I'm going to stop the meeting. I'm going to stop screen sharing, and this way we won't have a weird interruption. And I'll reopen the meeting in just a minute or two. So I'll be right back, and then you can log back on.